Samuel Patterson lay on the floor, a stream of blood running from the massive gash in his head and puddling next to the fridge. It was a gruesome sight, but Agent P had seen similar cases many times before. He knelt down and used a fork to pull apart the flesh and peer inside. Looks like something burst out from inside, probably hibernated there for days before even causing any pain. Agent P stood and opened the fridge. Wait, that's odd.
What?
Maxine's sultry voice blared from the microphone in his ear. Agent P jumped in shock. Hey! Control the volume! You almost blew my ear off.
Damn.
The volume lowered as a flurry of obscenities filled the earpiece.
It's this new tech. Back when we had government funding, we could afford things that weren't so fiddly.
Well, get it under control. This is not a test. This is the real deal. The director gave us this intel, which means it's gotta have some validity.
Don't get snippy with me, Agent P. Just tell me what's odd and get out of there.
Agent P kneeled in front of the fridge and stared at the cartons of milk that filled the inside. Each one was open, stapled closed, and covered with duct tape. This guy has a ton of milk cartons that look like they've been repurposed.
To what end?
Maxine sounded just as confused as Agent P. I'm not sure. This whole situation seems strange. There's only one room in the entire house with furniture, and the amount of food would suggest more than one person living here. If I had to guess, I'd say that the rest ran after their pal bit the big one.
You think it could be some kind of organization?
I don't know. We'll have to take one of these cartons back for tests. As Agent P lifted the carton, there was a loud explosion, and it was thrown against the far wall amid milk and pieces of refrigerator.
Agent P? Fall! Fall!
There it sat, taped to the back of what was left of the fridge. The book. Agent P's heart sank, and he felt his throat clench as he tried to take a deep breath. He spit milk and blood onto the floor as he stood.
Paul, please respond! Jesus, I can't lose you too! First Marcus goes AWOL and we lose whatever support we had. Finding you was... Paul, I just can't!
With one finger, Agent P switched off communications as he pulled the book from the fridge wall. He could still hear her crying, but there was nothing to be said. The book was a death sentence. Every agent knew that going in. Now that all the immune in the agency had been executed, there was no one to help them survive the power of the book. He opened the book to a random page and read the title, Chugglers. He did not have to read more. He could feel it moving around at the back of his mouth. It was already growing, and his mouth went numb. His eyes fell on the words carved above where the book had been taped. He will rise, and the world will burn. Agent TKO, please follow orders. The director's voice was stern and uncaring. Her partner was sitting in front of her, tears running down the rosy cheeks she had come to know so well. Tia Kyle's finger was on the trigger of a pistol aimed at her partner's head. She was right on the edge, half of her wanting to throw the pistol away, and the other knowing that this had to be done. It was the right thing, the only thing they could do. As she stood, staring at her friend, partner, and lover, she found herself looking for someone to blame. At first she blamed Agent Marcus, the one that made it necessary to eliminate half of the agency. He was the only immune to go crazy and nearly destroy everything. He was the reason she was standing here, about to execute the person she had been planning a future with. But it wasn't his fault. He didn't ask to be what he was. No, this was the fault of that damned book. TK, this isn't a hard choice. Her partner's voice was soft, somewhere between broken and supportive. If you hit me square in the head, I won't suffer. Tia loved that voice. A melody born from scarlet lips that tasted like strawberries and cream. She knew that when she heard that voice, it wouldn't be long before she saw the chestnut curls and strikingly gray eyes of her partner. Tia's hand shook, and she felt her grip on the pistol slip. She quickly used her other hand to steady her aim and tighten her grip. She felt her chest burn, and tears dripped from her chin onto her suit. Patricia, I love you so much." A loud explosion echoed through the room. Tia's gun flew back, sending stabs of pain up her arm, and her legs gave way. Her knees hit the floor, and the pistol clattered next to her. She felt hot streaks of blood on her face, and knew that she was only a few feet away from her biggest regret. She felt something inside of her snap, that thing that allowed a person to fall in love. Everything had vanished. The world had pulled away, and all she saw were the memories they'd had together. She felt herself get lost in the good times, trying to forget what she'd done. It was a facade. Every time she thought she had found happiness again, the echo of her pistol filled the air, and she was once again sitting in that room, blood soaking the knees of her pants. Then she was standing again, pistol aimed at her lover's head, the same memory echoing over and over, the same nightmare she had every night since she found the page of the book her partner hid deep in her drawer. Agent TKO opened her eyes to see a small goblin-like creature scuttle across the floor and climb out the window. It was done. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know her job. She didn't even remember how to tie her shoes. "Memory shear," the page had said. "Eater of good memories." She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and was standing again, pistol aimed at her lover's head. The director knelt down next to a child's coloring book and lifted it from the puddle of blood that had already started soaking its pages. He adjusted his mask and started flipping through it. The parts that weren't stained with blood had been badly colored, probably by the students that lay dead several feet away. "So, what went on here? Tell me what you see." The director looked up at Agent H. Agent H's hands were visibly clammy, and the director could see the sweat building on his forehead. Well, the bodies died from blood loss caused by thousands of small ruptures in the skin. It looks like every child in here was suffering from some kind of skin infection. Each victim seems to be suffering from late stages of rigor mortis, except the bodies are still warm." The director glanced at Agent H, who was pulling bodies aside. "What could cause that?" "Well," Agent Hamilton nearly slipped on the blood, but caught himself on the wall. "Rigor mortis is caused when the body no longer has the oxygen needed to create adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, a chemical needed for muscle relaxation. I've read that sometimes people who've gone through heart surgery suffer from it afterwards, but I don't think that's what happened here." The director used the coloring book to crush a small spider that was crawling up the wall. "Okay. I guess it could have been caused by a rapid loss of ATP. Maybe it's a food source. That would explain the ruptures and the skin irritation." Agent H stepped away from the pile of bodies and wiped sweat from his forehead. "So," the director turned toward Agent Hamilton, "you're saying that these things somehow get in the body and then burst out after they've finished feeding?" "Yeah, it looks like..." Agent Hamilton's voice faded, and he lifted a book off the desk. The director could see the blood drain from his face. Nothing else needed to be said. They both knew what the book was, and what it meant. Agent Hamilton opened the book and began to read. "Fiddly warts. This microscopic airborne larva..." The director watched as Agent H became unable to move. He stepped back as one of his most promising agents fell to the floor, unable to hold himself up. He knelt, looking into the scared and confused eyes of Agent H. "I know you're confused. Why am I not rolling in agony?" Here, the director pulled his mask off and watched as Agent H's confusion turned to seething hatred. "We're on the same side. I will avenge you." The director stood, slipped his mask back on, and walked to the car, where he grabbed a large container of gasoline. When he returned, the warts and blisters covering Agent H were already splitting open. Thousands of spiders were pushing their way out from beneath the skin, and you could hear Agent H try to scream in agony. The director began pouring the gasoline over the children Agent H, and that horrible book. The fire would hide it all, and, even though he knew it was unlikely, maybe it would destroy the book as well. The toys were what hurt. I was always on my knees collecting the toys of children who would never open their eyes again. It wasn't my job, but I did it because the thought of seeing the toys lying there scared me more. The constant memory of a life lost too early. Every day I would come in to find less children and more orphaned toys. So I spent a few hours every morning cleaning up the toys left behind, burning them, so I didn't have to endure the pain. "Can you please? It hurts." He looked at me with pleading eyes. I almost missed his request. I was busy checking his IV, and his voice was a whisper. He was so weak that I could see him strain as he reached out for my shirt. I felt my heart break as his hand fell limp. I took a cloth and wiped the sweat from his pale brow. Then I lifted his arm and slid it beneath the thin hospital blankets. I brushed his hair from his eyes and smiled at him. "That's all I'm allowed to give you. Any more and it wouldn't be healthy." "But I'm not healthy." His voice broke, but he pressed on, becoming rough and urgent. "My mom says that soon I'll be out playing with my friends, but every day I feel worse. My dad bought me a football, but I'm scared I'll never be able to use it. I'm in pain all the time and I just want to sleep." I stared at his brown eyes, trying to keep a smile on my face. This wing of the hospital wasn't for children that were getting better. It wasn't that they'd given up. It was just that the hospital had no idea what to do. This wing was for the children that needed a miracle. I glanced at the football that sat on the bedside table, and once again felt that ache. Another toy that I would have to clean up. I felt my eyes water as I turned to his pleading eyes. "All right, just a little more. I can't promise it will make it better, but it will help." I stood, reaching for the syringe. I stuck the needle into the bottle and pulled back the plunger. 10, 20, 30 milligrams should be enough, but I didn't stop there. I watched as my fingers drew the plunger back further until the syringe filled with 100 milligrams of the opiate. I told myself that was too much. I tried to stop myself from stabbing the needle deep into the young boy's veins. I glanced at the football sitting nearby and felt my fingers push the plunger all the way down. I fell back in my chair, and the syringe fell to the floor with a clatter. I saw the young boy smile, close his eyes, and relax. I watched as the EKG flatlined, the constant beep etching into my mind, digging in deep until all I heard was a light buzz, like thousands of wasps sitting deep in my head. Had I just done that? Why couldn't I stop myself? The football rolled off the nightstand, along the floor, and stopped at the feet of a being. It had a large body, only outmatched by the tall hat on its head that bent as it touched the ceiling. Its face was simple, almost doll-like. 2 large, cavernous eyes filled with blackness. It was familiar and yet foreign, like a friend I hadn't seen in years. It reached out a hand. As I took its hand, I felt the guilt lift off my shoulders. I felt my body shift, bones rearrange, and my emotions replaced by urges. All I wanted to do was find children that discarded their toys. I wanted to teach them how lucky they were. I fell to my 3 legs and grabbed my head from the floor. There was a buzzing inside, and a small wasp flew from my gaping mouth. "Mismatch," I said, grabbing the syringe from the floor. I turned toward the being as it opened a book and began to write inside. Sitting in the dark, Billy Madison had trouble finding things he could see to describe. The smells and noises wafting under the door only brought tears and nausea. He knew that somewhere in this closet was a small box of old crayons, the outside of the box a pale pink, and the inside covered with a rainbow of colorful smudges from the crayons shifting around. He often found himself sitting there, with the lid open, letting the smell of aging crayons fill his nose. Back when the argument started, before his parents got the divorce, Billy needed a way to distract himself from the turmoil. He had read books for years. He loved the way a few words could become pictures, smells, and transport someone to a completely different place. He found that the best way to distract himself from his crumbling family life was to describe things he could see. He began writing his descriptions and soon became adept at turning words into worlds. Billy tried to find something to distract him from the sound of the wet tearing, but the darkness of the closet made that impossible. He felt his lunch come up as another wave of stink filled his nose. Tears ran down his face as he tried to vomit in the corner as quiet as he could. When the sound stopped, he was sure that thing on the other side of the door had heard him. He waited, breath held, until the noises started up again. That meant he was safe, and it also meant that he was alone. When she showed up at the front door, he found himself caught in her eyes, a spellbinding inferno of blue and green. She was tall, but not as tall as his dad. Her hair was the color of wheat, wrapped in gold thread, and fell down her shoulders like a waterfall over rapids. She knelt down, smiled at him, and in that moment, he felt protected. He felt her hand ruffle his hair, and heard her ask for him to get his father. Her strong hand spun him around, gave him a little push, and he heard her giggle. He called for his dad as he rushed up the stairs to his room. He'd been expecting to loathe this amazing new beauty that was replacing his mother. All he wanted to do now was make sure that she would be his new mommy. It wasn't until he got into his room that he realized something wasn't right. Something stirred in his memory as he glanced across the books in his room. His eyes fell on a book that rested between Anne Rice and A.A. Milne. He pulled the book out and, ignoring the strange symbol on the cover, began flipping through the pages to find what he was looking for. He had been right. There it was, describing her to a T. From her almost gold hair to her control over those that saw her, she was what the book called New Mommy, a creature that preyed on single fathers and their children. He heard his father scream and leaped into his closet as his door opened. It sounded like she was dragging something big, and when she spoke, it sounded as though her mouth was full of something. It didn't take long for the rancid smell of meat to invade his hiding place. "Come out, Billy. We've got news to share." She waited for what felt like hours, and then laughed. "I can wait here for as long as you need. I have plenty to eat." That's when the crunching started, and even though he tried to deny it, he knew it was his dad giving off that horrible smell. Billy was about to give up when the sound of his window shattering filled his ears. He heard something heavy slam against his closet door, and couldn't stop a scream from escaping. He heard wood break, and the sound of his books tearing into shreds as something roared through the room. Several more slams, and then things went quiet, until a loud scream filled the house, then degraded into gurgling. He was about to open the door to look when it flew open, and he surprisingly found a young blonde girl looking down at him. She held out her hand and smiled a genuine smile. "I'm Rosalind. You're safe now." Agent Cold felt distant. She heard the director's serious tone. She knew what it meant, but she wasn't there. She was floating somewhere outside of herself. It was safe there, a hiding place from the pain that would pierce through the walls she'd built up like an arrow through paper. Here she could remember things like they had once been. Here she could believe that one day she'd see Felix again. "You broke into the Megrim holding facility and damaged agency property. This is not something the agency can forgive." The director folded his hands on the desk. Felix wasn't someone she dreamed about loving. He'd spent most of his time at his computer, either working or playing those games he raves about. In fact, when they'd first met, she found him unattractive, with his messy hair, badly shaven beard, and oversized clothing. Now she wore his shirts just to feel close to him. Now she played his games so that she could understand why he'd burst out laughing randomly. Now she used his aftershave so that she'd never forget his smell. I was able to knock your punishment down from execution, but you have to work with me. You have to say that you understand. The love grew slowly, but stronger than any she'd ever known. Before she knew it, she began looking forward to talking with him. She realized that the things she once hated, she now found endearing. She found herself ruffling his hair into a mess, because she liked it better that way. When he agreed to a date, she felt like her future was looking bright. She felt like the dark clouds she'd lived under had opened up, letting the sun shine through. Pain arced through her cheek as she was yanked back into the present. Her hand went to her cheek, where the director had slapped her. She felt the panic rise as the guilt and grief she'd been hiding from came flooding in. Her body shook, and her breathing became ragged, uncontrollable. She felt the floodgates open as a wail escaped her body, a wail of a horror she'd never wanted, a wail that begged for forgiveness. You broke into the Megrim holding facility and terminated Subject G-34. Along the way you took out 5 armed guards and thousands of dollars worth of equipment. Because of this breach, several Megrim victims got out and were able to kill 3 of my best agents. The Megrim that escaped had to be terminated, killing the host victims as a result. We lost more than 12 good agents because of your insanity. We were looking for a cure, Agent Cold. They didn't have to die. Felix did. Felix could still feel the long tendrils of the Megrim snaking beneath his skin and into his organs. That's why he was screaming all the time, begging to be saved, while the Megrim used his body as its own. His screams had haunted her dreams for months, while the director promised a cure. She heard his calls for help. She heard him beg for death. She heard his bones crack as he fought against the Megrim's control. She could hear his screams over the 1,000 other victims when she pulled the trigger and ended his suffering. You are now being relocated to the prison facility in Antarctica. There you will live out the remainder of your life a prisoner. Do you understand? She said yes, between sobs. I understand that you're both confused. You thought you were heading to imprisonment, and Billy here probably thinks he's in some kind of trouble. Believe me, I am glad that neither of these are true. Now, before you ask, you are both in Antarctica. This facility was built by the agency as a prison and has since been refurbished into our headquarters. We are the Church of Stog, and before I get into what that means, I'm going to have to step back a bit, way back. There once was a tribe of people known as the This was long before the written word, before even proto-writing. It was back when we were still using rudimentary symbols. If I were to go into detail about what we know of this tribe, we would be talking for several days. The important thing to note is their beliefs. They believed that the human spirit was this amorphous consciousness known as the Stog. When a human dies, their Stog is released in one of 2 forms. There is the Anch Stog, the natural or neutral state. They considered Stog in this state to be pure. Pure Stog are believed to be balanced and thought to keep disasters away. The had many rituals to ensure that their people would end up in this form. Please note that I said neutral and not good. It is important to understand that they didn't believe in a good state. You were either Anch Stog and therefore at peace, or you were Kat Stog. As you may have already guessed, Kat Stog is the unbalanced or evil state. These Stog are born from dark intentions and horrific deeds. If in life a person did immoral things, they would end up in this state. Murder, lying, cheating, manipulating, abuse. All of these could easily tilt you into this category. They also believe that a person could put themselves into this state by merely believing they've done these horrible things. I know you aren't sure what this has to do with you two, but be patient. I'm getting there. Stog naturally are attracted to one another. When Stog meet, it is believed they combine to become larger and more powerful. When it comes to Stog, these larger Stog contributed to times of prosperity, at least until they faded away, as Stog tend to do. It was believed that they were reborn, but they could easily just vanish into nothing. There is not much information on that, and it's often debated around here. Before I go on, I need you to understand I'm not trying to frighten you. I think you've been frightened enough. However, this next bit of information is pretty crucial to understanding what this all has to do with you. We don't know what a large Stog is like. We know that Stog don't easily fade away, and we know that they can do unbelievable things. The only thing we've got is a symbol found in some ruins. Here is a picture. When the old man slid the picture across the table to them, it was Billy Madison that reacted first. His chair toppled as he jumped backwards. A loud yelp escaped him as he pressed himself against the wall. He had seen that symbol before. It was why he was alone. It was why he would never play catch with his father again. Unable to look at it anymore, he glanced at the door where Rosalind was peeking in the window. There were tears in her eyes. Agent Cold stayed calm. She lifted the image in shaking hands and took a deep breath. She glanced back at the old man. His face wasn't taunting. It was the face of someone who knew what they were talking about. She looked back at the symbol she'd only seen once before, on the cover of that horrible book. It is the symbol for Stog, the old man whispered. Subject S14J Gravy was brought to the attention of the High Priest by one of our many traveling missionaries who had just returned from a recruiting in Utah. As of this moment, there is no way to confirm whether it is evidence of a large Stog or simply an anomaly, but as per procedure, we've procured the property rights. As a precaution, we are not permitting access to the mountain and the surrounding area. Trespassers are removed from the site and executed. Rumors are started to dissuade people from exploring further. The following is an excerpt from a diary recovered from the bottom of the western cliff face. Shit. I don't know what that was, but come dawn I'm heading back. I don't need this, I just wanted a bit of a climb. But the higher I got, the more my hands shake. I just can't get this feeling of dread out of my chest, and the wind whipping past sounds like people screaming for help. That's not the worst though. The worst happened about an hour ago, as I was making my way up to where I was planning to set up my portaledge. This portion of the climb was 60 to 90 meters of sheer cliff. I planned to set up my portaledge near the 75-meter mark. The cliff face has very few handholds, but there's a large crack that travels up the middle of the rock face that is perfect for making the distance pass quickly. After having climbed the first 500 meters, I was anxious for a rest. Hand over hand, I pushed on, fighting to ignore the dizzying height below me, and trying to beat the sun before it vanished below the horizon. I stuck my hand into the crack so I could leverage myself to the next grip, when something wet, slimy, and moving slid along my fingers. Surprised, I yanked my hand out, and, maintaining my previous grip, stared into the crack. Deep in the fracture of rock, there was an upside-down man, his body contorted beyond belief, so that his head was sitting right where I put my hand. I called to him, but he was speaking gibberish. The man needed help, and I was the only person able to. I reached into the crack, trying to find a grip to pull this man out, but my hand would only fit in a few inches. The more I tried, the more I realized that it was hopeless. The man stared as I attempted to reach him, and then smiled widely. He spoke clearly this time, and the smile on his face made my legs shake. The screaming of the wind was ear-shattering, but somehow his voice cut through the noise. I can count them all as they fall. Watch them all drip-drop past. See them go. I felt something massive fall a few feet to the left, followed almost immediately by another to the right. It took me a few moments to realize that they were bodies. One after another they flew past, several nearly hitting me, and a few forcing me to press into the rock face to avoid them. The man in the crack was laughing as they fell, and kept laughing until the sound of their bodies smashing into the ground below resounded back up the mountain. I turned to the man, but he just placed a finger to his lips and slid slowly back into the darkness of the crack. The terrifying thing is that I can see the ground from my portaledge, and there isn't a single body down there. End of excerpt. The church has sent several acolytes up the cliff and has received eerily similar reports. Studies have been concluded due to the extreme risk to acolyte life and unfavorable conditions. Billy sat across the table from the small, blonde girl, Rosalind. At first her size had made him think she was much younger, but asking around he'd learned that she was a year older than him. 10 years old, and somehow she'd fought off the beast that had killed his father.
You're staring again.
Her voice was lined with acid and boredom. She closed the folder she'd been paging through and frowned. Sorry. Billy looked away, his hand finding the apple he'd brought with him to snack on. He took a bite and tried not to catch her gaze.
Fine. What do you want to know?
She sighed and grabbed his apple to snag a bite of her own. Why are we here?
Next question.
Aren't you scared?
Next question.
Do you trust these guys? She took another bite of Billy's apple.
What happened to your mother?
Divorce. Where are your parents?
My dad killed my mom. It was a long time ago, so I don't really remember it.
But there was something in her face that said she did. Where's your dad?
He's around. You'll meet him eventually.
Okay. Billy paused. I don't know why I'm here. I don't feel special.
You aren't.
Rosalind leaned back in her chair and tossed the apple core so that it bounced off his forehead.
You are so over your head that the best thing for you would be to step out into the cold and keep walking until you collapse. Same with that agent lady. Neither of you belong here. Your hearts are still alive.
Yours isn't?
I held my mother's head in my hands. I watched her eyes stop seeing me. She tried to breathe, but only blood came out. See, my father had torn her in half. One half in my lap and the other across the room. I cried for hours. Then hours became days. Days became a week. I was 5, starving, and the only food lay on the floor in a crumbled heap.
She paused.
Maybe my father knew that.
What? Billy began to regret his questions. This was not what he had wanted.
Your mother left. Your father died. My mother became lunch, and my father is a monster. You are just a sad boy who accidentally read the wrong book. That's why you're here. Do you want to know why I'm here?
She leaned in close so that their eyes met. Everything about her screamed predator. Her posture, her expressions, everything screamed, "Walk into my trap, little boy." Her breath smelled of old meat, and her teeth resembled fangs. There was something in her eyes, a hunger. Billy began to sweat when he realized that she was thinking about him. No, I don't. She stood up, knocking the chair down behind her.
The food here is gross.
She stopped at the door and looked back. Billy no longer saw the small girl in a frilly dress. Now he saw a monster. Something twisted. Something that had tossed away their humanity and became something new.
Pray they don't lower their guard in this prison. You'll be my first stop if they do.
She closed the book and stared at the lump of her feet at the end of her bed. There was a comforting depression nearby, a spirit that was always there to help her through any hardship. Her fingers ran along the cover of the book, along the slight bump that was the title, Things That Go Bump. A group of stories meant to scare, but to her it was a fairy tale. Her own life was destroyed by bloodshed before she had a chance to live it. She'd never go back to the oppressive rules and nights of being unable to sleep. She found a home in New York City. She had fought long and hard to build a life here beyond the reach of that terrible place. She wiped a tear from her cheek, and the depression shifted so it was closer. Shh. It's okay, Sammy. I just miss Leland. She ran her fingers through the spectral fur of her closest friend. I think I'm gonna head off to sleep. I'll see you in the morning. She knew the dog wouldn't like it. When she slept, Sammy went away. When she slept, Sammy couldn't keep her safe. But she had to sleep. She felt the bed shift as the depression that was Sammy faded. She reached up to her hair and untied the blue ribbon. The sheriff's ribbon, something she had gone back for before she left her home for good. She dropped it on her nightstand and slid further under the covers. Soon, she had drifted off to sleep, trying to think about anything other than the life she'd left behind. She woke up dazed, unsure of the time and in a cold sweat. It was dark outside, and you could see the full moon out the window. Her eyes flew around the room, a reflex she developed at a young age, a search for all the dark things that could be hiding. Nothing. She sighed, lay back on her pillow, and that's when she sees it. It sat there clinging to the ceiling, looking down at her. It looked like an armless, emaciated child with too many mouths that ran down its chest. She knew this thing. She'd read about it in her book. Husker, a creature that attacked people while they slept, leaving behind nothing but their unbroken skin in the morning. The creature let go of the ceiling and landed on her legs. Its face was inches from her when her fist connected with its chin. With a snarl, the creature grasped her arm and tossed her into the wall. She hit the floor and looked up to see the thing slip off the bed and crawl toward her. She kicked at it, but the creature grabbed her leg and held it to the floor. Once again, she was at the mercy of something that shouldn't exist. She'd been a fool to think she could escape this life. Then the creature was gone, pushed aside by an invisible force. Sammy. The creature rolled with Sammy till it collided with the wall. A feeling of dread filled her. Sammy was in trouble. She watched as the creature stood, lifting her canine ghost into the air. She could hear the dog whine, and without thinking, she grabbed the first thing she could reach and swung. When the cat-topped cane connected with the beast's back, she heard the crack of bone. It dropped the dog and turned to stare at her. She leveled the cane, ready for another swing. With a low growl, the Husker slipped to the window and disappeared. She looked out the window a few seconds later as she tied the ribbon into her hair. She saw hundreds of Huskers climbing out of windows as far as she could see, each one dragging along a bloody mess. And there, in the middle of this bloodshed, in the middle of the street, stood a man. He wore a mask. A twisted imitation of a yin-yang mask. Before we start, I just wanted to say that I've been following your career since you ran for mayor in your hometown, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't impressed.
Well, I'm flattered. But before you continue, I must say how insensitive that is. What happened in New York is a tragedy, and has nothing to do with my presidential campaign.
Quite right. I apologize. Well, let's get started. Over 6 million New Yorkers lost their lives last week in what could only be called an animal escape.
Jesus Christ. I'm sorry to interrupt, but just take a second to think about those numbers. Just 2 weeks ago, New York City was home to more than 8 million people. Now, because of some accident in animal transport, nearly 2 million people are left. That's staggering. That's unacceptable.
But you survived the attack. I mean, you recently moved to Manhattan, so you could have easily been one of those 6 million.
I'm a very lucky man. I had some matters to attend to upstate, so I wasn't even there. Perhaps if I was...
Some people have come forward saying that the animal escape explanation is a fabrication. I understand that you took care to make sure the real cause of this tragedy was brought to light. Do you think it was fabricated?
I think that when faced with such a large loss of life, people will have trouble accepting a mundane reason. I had trouble accepting it, and that's why I made it my goal to get to the bottom of it. And we did. It was an animal escape. A truck full of aggressive monkeys tipped over and the monkeys escaped. This is the real world. There's nothing magical about 6 million corpses. Just something tragic.
Now let's talk about your upstate plans again.
Once again, that is inappropriate. Let's please stick
As I mentioned before, I've been following your career since you became mayor in, what was it again? Saratoga Springs.
We need to get back on topic, please.
Oh, don't worry, I'm getting there. Did you know that between the years 2012 and 2013, more than 30 children went missing? Did you also know that half of them were found half-eaten a month after they went missing? Isn't that interesting?
That is terrible. Did they ever catch the killer?
No, but 2013 was the year you ran for mayor, right? This news was everywhere. I'm surprised you weren't aware of it.
Well, as you've mentioned, I was busy running for mayor.
Yeah, you really shot up there. About a month before, you were supposed to be inheriting your father's beekeeping company. That's a pretty extreme change in lifestyles.
The world has a way of putting us where we're supposed to be. Perhaps I'm supposed to be running for president. Perhaps you're supposed to write a bad article and wind up on the street. Fate, some call it.
Let me worry about my article. You don't get paid to do my job.
Oh, no, please forgive me. I figured I could give some advice.
Well, let me take that advice and get back to the subject at hand.
Good.
Did you know that those missing children didn't stop going missing?
6 million people set aside for a smear piece. I am shocked that my competition would go this far.
No. Instead, the disappearances followed your career. In every city you've visited or lived, there has been a disappearance. That seems real fishy to me. Do you have any explanation for this?
Am I supposed to?
No. Let's change the line of questioning. So people claim it wasn't an animal escape, to which you state the opposite. I have something to show you.
Well, it is quite blurry. It really could just be a monkey, but I do see where people...
No, I'm sorry, I've misled you. That picture is terrible evidence that it wasn't a monkey. I have plenty of much clearer ones. No, instead, if you look in the background, you'll see someone familiar. Who is that?
The one with the mask?
Don't insult me, Mr. Mackenzie. I'm talking about the man standing next to him. I'm talking about you. You not in upstate New York, you watching the chaos. You standing next to a man that many people claim started the whole thing.
Allow me to give you some really good advice. Throw out your evidence. Torch this article, go back to LA, and find some other scandal to write about. This is a tragedy, and we don't need... The families of the dead don't need someone only looking to further their career.
Roger. You don't mind if I call you Roger, right?
I do.
Roger, my sister and her boyfriend is among the dead. I know you had something to do with it, and I swear I will get to the bottom of this. This article is getting written, whether you like it or not.
Well, then I believe we're done here. I can't wait to read this travesty of an article, should it ever get published. I mean, if something terrible happens to you before you could finish it, that would be tragic.
It was nice meeting you, Roger Mackenzie. It will be nice putting you behind bars.
That's what they all say.
It happened many years ago, before you were born, before your parents were born, so far back that even books cannot recall. I was my father's Jeet Avid. As such, I was set in the path to inherit the caretaker's mantle. You see, people who are from my tribe all have jobs set in stone, a calling determined by blood and soaked in honor. The butchers spoke to the beasts and requested fresh meat and skins. The grain bringers danced with the dirt, coaxing our crops to grow and keeping our stores full. The spear breakers called upon the Ankh to give us strength in battle. The caretaker, well, there was only ever one caretaker, and one day, that was going to be me. Caretakers pull the Stog from the ashes of our recently passed, and lead them to the Ankh. A caretaker must be strong of Stog and body. They are not only a beacon in the darkness for our dead, but they also have the honor of being their shield. They are there to keep the Khat from leading the dead astray. One Stog joining the Khat could lead to disaster for my people. A caretaker gets no training. In fact, until they take the mantle, they help with the other jobs. A caretaker only learns to do their job when, well, my father died when I was still young, and I guess that's where my story starts. I poured my father's ashes into a leather decorated to show his achievements. The leather was from his very first kill, and the twine woven from his dark, thick hair. When I learned to walk, I killed my first hopper mouse to make my skin. My father's was mountain lion skin. That's the kind of man he was. I felt heat around my eyes as I folded the leather over the remains and pulled the twine tight. As tears slipped down my cheeks, I lifted the pouch to my lips. I kissed my father for the last time. The leather tasted of smoke and smelled of bloodbean. Before decorating, it rested high over flame and had a rubbing of bloodbean oil. The smoke pulls the Stog from the ashes, and the bloodbean keeps my father's Stog near the pouch. My father loved bloodbeans. Now would be my first time taking the Stog to the Ankh. I tied the pouch to the carry stick. Once the journey began, no one could touch the pouch. Not even me. My people considered it greedy, wanting the dead to stay with the living. I hadn't left yet, and already my breathing was heavy. This would be so much easier if I could have someone to tell me it was going to be okay. But no one would watch me leave. I stood and looked at the darkened huts. Inside, the families would be sitting around their unlit fires, their head bowed to show reverence to the dead. It was an honor to die. Merging with the Ankh led to the tribe's prosperity. I slipped the carry stick over my shoulder, careful to not let the leather touch my skin. I stared at the unforgiving forest in front of me, and again felt tears streak down my cheeks. No matter how much honor dying gave the tribe, it didn't make saying goodbye any easier. Pulling strength from memories of my father, I broke through the foliage and into the dark forest. It was that night, far from my people, in the unforgiving land beyond the safety of our fires, that it came to me. The sun was long eaten by the horizon. I was counting the eyes of the Ankh that watched from above when I heard the branch snap. I sat, alert, glancing at the leather pouch that hung on the carry stick in arm's reach. It leaned against a boulder, close enough to protect, but far enough to not fall on me in my sleep. Another branch snapped as the round head of a mountain lion slipped into the clearing. It was only a hair's length from the pouch. It stared at me for a long time before stepping into the clearing. Mountain lions were dangerous, but this one was a class of its own. It was the largest I had ever seen. My people would warn small children of the dangers of mountain lions. Many times in the past, children would go missing. We would search for hours, only to find their half-eaten bodies hidden under leaves and clumps of grass. It wasn't unusual for a family to have 2 children, one there in case the first was taken by the mountain lion. We call the second child Jeet Avid. I was a Jeet Avid, and my father discovered my older brother's body before I came of age. I kept silent as the massive carnivore used its large snout to sniff at the ground. It was an incredible beast. As it wandered through my camp, I could see its powerful muscles shift beneath its short fur. A single swing from its powerful forequarters could take off my head. As it sniffed the leather pouch, I felt my heart thump against my chest. The mountain lion licked the pouch, and then glanced at me before sitting on its haunches, facing me. For several long moments we stared at each other. The deep red of its last kill still stained its jaws. I couldn't help but think that my blood would end up in the same place.
You're doing fine.
The mountain lion's voice was rough, deep, and filled with familiarity.
This is what you were born for.
No. I stopped a moment before continuing. I was born a Jeet Avid, in case you took my brother. I am here because of your hunger. The mountain lion laid down, resting its large head on his forepaws.
I suppose you could blame me. It's easier than realizing that your destiny was to be right here, right now. You like to take the easy way, don't you, rodent killer?
I forced myself to stand, even though my legs were mush. I am Mott, future caretaker of my tribe. I will be taking my father to join the Ankh, and you're not going to stop me, beast. The mountain lion stood, its mouth opening to a wide smile, revealing its razor teeth.
Well, I am impressed. I expected a rodent killer like you to be more fearful. There is hope for you yet.
It leaned over, grasped my father's carry stick, and tossed it at my feet.
Pick it up. Let me tell you what comes next, my fearless caretaker.
It was at that moment that I realized why the voice was so familiar. As if declawed, this ferocious creature now brought me as much fear as my parents had. Not surprising, because this mountain lion was my father's Stog. With tearful eyes, I reached down and lifted the carry stick to my shoulder.
First, that pouch you carry is nothing but a bundle of ashes and leather.
The mountain lion walked to my back and sniffed the pouch. I don't understand. I glanced at the hanging pouch, which still felt important to me. My people sing songs of its importance. The Stog pushed my back, causing me to fall to my knees.
It holds no power on its own, and as long as you carry it, that will be true. The pouch normally attracts Stog, both Kot and Ankh. When you hold it, you restrict that attraction.
So how are you here? I got to my feet. You shouldn't know where it is. The mountain lion nudged some branches out of the way and began walking through the forest. I rushed to catch up and was stuck jogging to keep up with the feline's walking speed. For several hours we traveled in silence. Soon the sun rose over the horizon, and I expected the Stog to vanish, but it didn't.
Can you sense who I am?
The silence broke as we stopped for a rest. We were sitting on a hill overlooking a large grassy plain. A group of hoofed animals grazed in the distance,
and the mountain lion eyed them with a look of hunger. "You are my father's Stog."
How do you know that?
The carnivore licked its paw. I brought my hand to my chest and pressed it against the beating of my heart. I can feel it. It's like there's a line going from me to the pouch, and from the pouch to you. My father's Stog rolled over, so that the sun warmed its belly.
Do you remember when he would take you out on the lake? When he wanted to catch the large fins, he dropped a heavy rock into the water tied to the boat. Then the boat wouldn't go anywhere, while you both dived into the water.
I remember, I said, but the truth was that I didn't. My father never took me out to catch large fins. That was always my brother. After my brother died, my father never went out to catch large fins again.
The pouch is like the boat, drifting in this realm trying to find its way to Stog. It doesn't care what type of Stog it is. You are the anchor, there to keep the pouch from drifting. A pouch without an anchor would collect Stog of all kinds.
The Stog licked its lips as it stared at the hooved creatures. Why do you hunger? You could catch one. I pointed at the grazing beasts. The predator stood and stared down at me.
Just because you want something doesn't mean you should have it. You learned this back when you had chores, but your brother wanted to play. Why can you not remember all that I have taught you?
Once again, the Stog was mistaken. Only this time my chest burned with an old anger. I remembered many times when I cried for my father's attention. I remembered the looks of superiority my brother would give me when my father called for him. I forced these memories away. I had to be strong. This was my duty, my calling, whether my father liked it or not.
Come, it is time to ensure that I join the Ankh. This is the most important part.
The Stog stood and was walking away from the field. I raced to catch up. We walked for several hours in silence. The sun had started to sink when my father's Stog stopped. We stood at the top of a cliff. The wind whipped past us, forcing me to grip the carry stick tight, to keep it from flying from my hands. The cliff overlooked a cavernous hole in the earth. Way at the bottom, almost invisible in the dark, was a raging whirlpool of water. You could tell, by looking, that anything that entered was never coming back. My father's Stog turned to me and smiled.
This is it. The water at the bottom connects to the Ankh, and will lead me where I need to go. All you must do is drop the carry stick in.
I glanced at the pouch, and then at the predator. After I do this, I'll never see you again?
No.
I dropped the pouch, and my arms wrapped around its neck. I buried my face in the soft fur. The Stog didn't budge, but I felt the warmth of its snout rest on my shoulder. My breath came out in bursts, and I felt my tears soak its fur. We sat there for a long time before I spoke. I'm going to miss you.
I will miss you too, Anta.
My body tensed. The burning in my chest turned into a chill that left me breathless. I could never be enough. I was the reject, the Jeet Avid. I was never going to be loved like my brother was. I remembered my father's destroyed expression when he found Anta's body. I remembered the way he cursed the sky. Even as young as I was, I could feel the despair as he looked at me. Me, his worthless, unreliable second son, forgotten until the moment reality leapt from beneath a bloody pile of leaves and twigs. Forgotten the nights after, when I heard my father cry himself to sleep. I stepped away and wiped the tears from my face. There it was again, the look of worry on the face of my father's Stog. The same look of worry I saw in my father's face before he faded away. a look that screamed,
"There is no hope to be had."
The sky above us burst with color as a second sun grew. Why can't you believe in me? Why can you only see my brother when you think about how far we've come? Why am I forgotten?
Wait, stop. You have to calm yourself.
The Stog's eyes widened, and it took a step back.
Please, on top.
Everything went quiet as I stared at the beast. It was visible in its eyes. It knew its mistake, and before it could move, I pulled the pouch from the carry stick and ripped it open. The air erupted with noise and heat as the second sun flew toward the earth. The ashes of my father drifted through the air as the ground began to shake. Forget me now. Now the light from the falling sun was brighter than any day. I could see as my father's Stog went from a look of worry to anger. Its body shifted, and the previously safe Stog was now undeniably dangerous.
It should have been you that died that day.
I felt my back hit the ground as the feline jumped at me.
Your mother believed in you, but he could always see the darkness. He knew the terrible destruction you would bring on your people.
You created this darkness. You are the worst caretaker our people have ever known. Its weight was crushing my chest, and I felt its claws slide into my flesh. I watched its eyes as I choked on the blood filling my lungs. I looked into what should have been my father's eyes, but all I saw was an emptiness and hunger. The sun finally collided with the earth, and the ground beneath us broke away. We dropped into the now boiling water below. My skin felt like fire, and my limbs no longer worked. My father's Stog and I pulled away from each other. We faded into darkness as the world was torn apart. It is okay, Mat. All is not lost. The Ankh can be cleansed. The voice came from nowhere. That's when I saw the flash of a moment yet to come. I saw 7 children, young adults with destroyed pasts and unknowable futures. I saw them stand strong against the Khat Stog, despite the danger. And one of them, the one who seemed most out of place, that one was an anchor.